Hi, I'm Sten Wandel. I'm Professor Emeritus at Lund University in Sweden. I'll present to you a proposal to bundle the concepts of electrification, high-capacity transport, and digitalization in the same reform package. Start with a summary and then talk about the concepts of electrification of long haul, high capacity transport, and the bundle idea, and then some ideas for further research and innovations, and finally conclusions. In summary, electrification could actually be paid by the increased productivity and reduced cost by introducing high capacity vehicles in the system. And the cost of adjusting the infrastructure for these longer or heavier vehicles is relatively small. However, the policymakers are concerned that the improvement in productivity will reduce the price for road transport, and by that, a modal shift from from rail and sea to road. And actually, they would like to have the opposite. But by mandating high-capacity vehicles that have to have zero emission powertrains, the savings of high-capacity vehicles could be used for the cost of electrification, instead of using taxpayers' money to subsidize the operators. And the savings could also be used for other things, like for the technical development and policy goals and so on, and compensating for the less in fuel taxes, deployment of the charging infrastructure, adapting in the roads for high capacity vehicles, particularly having longer turning lanes or stronger bridges. And both electrification and high capacity concepts require a digital framework to connect all the components and the processes, and also changes in legal and often also institutional framework to get this done. We'll finalize with ideas for further research to remove the barriers for electromobility and high capacity and digitalization. Promote innovations that could further speed up the electrification, and integration with the adjacent system, but particularly other types of transport modes. And finally, to get hard facts by systems analysis and cost-benefit analysis. Electrification of the long-haul transport requires an infrastructure for the energy supply, either electricity or hydrogen. The vehicles need electrical motors, but also energy packages with batteries, fuel cells with hydrogen tanks. And as said before, digital framework and legal institutional framework. The cost of this is not equal to trucks with combustion engines within the coming 2 to 5 years. In order to deploy earlier, subsidies are needed. We have noticed that the energy per ton kilometer or cubic meter kilometer decrease with the size of the vehicles, and with that also the battery compared to the payload. And the cost of ownership should also decrease if the distance between charging is the same for the different vehicle sizes. However, the longer hauls need charging not only at the depot and overnight, but also during the transport, and particularly fast charging up to 1 or even up to 4 megawatt. The time for deployment, listening to the OEMs, say about half of the trucks will be electric by 2030, and they will stop producing combustion engines somewhere 2045. However, many nations like Norway, they would like to ban the sales of fossil fuels and cars by 2025, and the sale of the fossil fuels itself by 2030. It's a little bit unclear if trucks are included in these targets. Some cities already are banning combustion engines in dedicated environmental zones, particularly due to noise and local harmful emissions, particles and NOx. To comply with the earlier adoption of electrification, there are large subsidies needed. The side effects: less noise and less harmful emissions. The drivers, barriers and causal relations for high capacity vehicles shouldn't go into detail, but at least 5 good things, drivers, could be seen: reduce costs, reduce road wear, accidents, less traffic need, lane space, climate, less emissions. However, there are some barriers. One is that lower the cost of truck transport may result in lower prices for truck transport, and more road transport and less rail and sea transport, and for their rebound effect of even more CO2. And this is something that particularly green politicians want to avoid. They would like to have the opposite modal shift. Cost of the road owners to strengthen the bridges and length of lanes, and very high cost of non-compliance, the road wear, accidents and other things if they are driving in your backyard is not very popular. The high capacity transport concept consists of 5 things. First of all, roads for these higher, longer and heavier vehicles. Vehicles that are as safe or safer than normal vehicles. Operating requirements on driving them on these specific routes, particular access conditions, and compliance monitoring and assurance systems. And all of these things require a digital framework and a legal institutional framework. The cost decreases with the size, and it's something between 15 and 30% less, depending on where you compare, what you compare with. The cost for adopting the roads, we made a cost-benefit study over 40 years and found that the cost is 1/13 of the benefits, and the cost for heavy vehicles about 1/8 for adoption over this longer term. So it's a very good investment calculus result. The cost for digitalization is also quite low because the compliance systems use already installed fleet management system and back-end systems at the OEMs. The time for deployment is very short because the current vehicles and trailers could only need some slight modifications, and very little modifications for the infrastructure if only longer vehicles are allowed to repaint the turning lanes and such things. For example, Finland, the increase from 60 to 76 tons 2013 and from 25.25 to 34.5 meter 2019, with minor changes in the infrastructure. So all roads you can use these vehicles, if not else there are other signs on them. Other countries are only allowing these high-capacity vehicles on dedicated roads that are prepared for them. The side effects are mostly positive. Less road space needed, up to 40% less. That means less congestion and less need for capacity investments. Less energy need, that means less climate impact and less harmful emissions. And fewer fronts to meet means also less accidents. The lower transport cost, as indicated before, is a challenge because that might lead to a non-desired modal shift. For the high-capacity vehicles, in the Swedish roadmap for them, we defined these 5 different types of access schemes. New road class, for example, for a certain weight. Permit on special cases, specified vehicles called performance-based certified, very common in Australia, but also in Sweden, for example, transport away from an iron ore mine or coal mine. Time limited, temporary construction site, for example, situation dependent, as they have in Estonia, where during the winter you can have more loads because it's frozen, or shift from diesel to electric powertrain or entering an environmental zone, has been tested in Stockholm, for example. And since long, permit for one specific trip of non-divisible goods or heavy mobile cranes is common in all countries. All these high-capacity vehicles seen so far have requirements to have some extra insurance that they're complying with the requirements. Self-regulations common in many countries, particularly in South Africa. Traditional monitoring with fixed stations, weight in motion and so on roadside. And then 3 to 7 here, we call them intelligent access. That means the GPS for helping the drivers to find the right route. I'll also check the weight on the axles and report to authorities without positions for statistical data, for example, for maintenance. And then with ID and position for being used for punishment, or I mean, if they don't comply, there are some sanctions coupled to that to the individual. And a certification of the whole system that is not misused and it's high quality, it's not cheating. And in some cases also been tested in Sweden to prevent terrorists stealing a truck and drive it into a pedestrian area and kill people, as was done in Stockholm a couple of years ago, to actually reduce the speed or force the vehicles actually to stopping. That's called a geofencing. Combining access and compliance scheme is actually a way to manage risks, and there are some examples. The proposal is to bundle electrification and high-capacity transport and digitalization in the same reform package. Only applying high-capacity transport reforms reduces energy consumption somewhere between 8 and 50% for the individual vehicles and less for all vehicles, of course. Reduce the battery size is very interesting with the size of the vehicle compared to per ton kilometer. Or compared to the actual payload. The cost savings we propose could be used, first of all, to the operators to keep part of the savings to compensate for the initial higher purchasing price, but also for buying electricity to the trucks at the charging stations, and by that indirectly pay for the energy infrastructure. The road owners need to have some cost coverage for adopting the high capacity, particularly when they're heavier for the bridges strengthening. And as everybody is talking about, when fuel taxes are taken away, there will be less money for maintenance of the roads, so there needs some compensation for that. And in many cases, it could also be used for enable multimodal transport and a shift to rail and sea transport. These transport systems could be used in together with each other, not competing with each other. And there is several examples how to do that. Digital framework, institutional framework talked about, and of course start with some pilots to fine-tune the policy instruments and the technology. And we think that a dual-trailer for long haul between terminals for less than truckload and parcels could be one. For a dry port, for a port to a dry port, also another one. And if sometimes there is need for shunting the trailers to shift from a duo to a single trailer configuration at city borders. Ideas for future research. First of all, remove the barriers for all these three types of concepts. We in Sweden have been particularly studying the barriers against digitalization and also high capacity vehicles. And it's important that the losing stakeholder get paid by the winning stakeholder, for example. And promote innovations that further speed up the electrification, like having a removable energy package that could be swapped at charging stations instead of standing still and waiting until the battery is charged. And the prime mover could add the capacity of the battery depending on the day trip. And also you can change the energy package when the technology becomes better to a new one. And this opens up for new type of business models where some players will provide both energy packages and energy charging infrastructure and take charge of that, and not the OEMs that have the battery stuck into the prime mover. Another concept has been distributed power, and that's been shown by a project called Airflex, large European project with all the OEMs. And there are electrical engines, generators in not only the prime mover, but also in the trailer or the link and the dolly, and they could work in cooperation and if the prime movers still have a combustion engine, it will become a hybrid power system and reduce the energy, the CO2 quite considerably during a transition period. Also, there are examples why converting kits and converters, replacing the combustion engine or adding some axles with electrical power. Also been discussing that leapfrogging directly to electromobility when building new infrastructure, can build new infrastructure, both a road and electricity and the digital infrastructure simultaneously, for example, in developing and fast-growing economies, and by that leapfrogging over combustion engines and fossil fuels. In many cases, it's also important to integrate with adjacent systems before and after transport, other transport modes, and also transports of people in different ways. And finally, to do some hard facts for the politicians, including cost-benefit analysis for a variety of scenarios, combining deployment strategies, technologies, and background. For example, low carbon corridor or a large geographical area. And as said, we did that in Sweden with very high benefit to cost ratios up to 13. Thank you.